Assalamu alaikum. My name is Fadwa Wazwaz. I'm going to be doing a podcast and I'm actually going to focus on the 7 under the shade of Allah. The reason for this podcast is similar. This particular Ramadan, I thought I would use that hadith because Ramadan is in a way like preparation for that day of resurrection. It's similar. It's like an opportunity to boot camp. But instead of focusing on one group of people, because this is kind of how we do it at times, where we focus on one person who may be doing something wrong, but we're overlooking the wrong that we are doing. And this hadith kind of invites all of us to look at our areas of weakness or opportunities to be under the shade of Allah. Sometimes the reason that we may not, like we'll read stories of the pious of the past, and we may feel like, well, it's not going to be like possible that I'll be Umar al-Khattab, the just ruler during the Prophet's time, upon him peace and blessings, or we're not going to be like Imam al-Shafi'i, the great, jurist. But the beauty of this, again, hadith, is that it has categories that can include everyone to come under the shade of Allah. And in reviewing it, you can look and see where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are as you approach Ramadan. Think about like how we'll be on the day of resurrection, and think about how you would want to be under the shade of the mercy and protection of Allah. So let's begin with the saying of Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessings. There are some 7 whom Allah will shade in his shade on the day when there is no shade except his shade. So who are these 7? There's the just ruler. The concept of justice in Islam, again, is very important. And I had done some podcasts on lovers of justice are many. The ruler and the ruled, there is in fact a saying by Umar al-Khattab, radiallahu anhu, may Allah be pleased with him, who talked about, how when people fear the ruler, it's not like the government is no longer a source of protection, then you can expect that the ruler and the ruled will face serious, fitna and sedition and problems. So a just ruler can kind of protect, you might say, society from that. And the faith that is required, like, again, you have to be put in a position of power. You have to be position of influence, kind of like Umar al-Khattab and others. Most of us don't have that position in society. But they are going to be called still. There's going to be an inclination that they have to face, and they have to say no to and to say yes to Allah. Because the first pillar, the first declaration of faith is there, La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah. And so there is no deity except God. And Muhammad is the final messenger of God. So, and for the just ruler, you might think of the verse in the Quran, Surah Ma'idah, verse 8, and do not let hatred cause you to act unjustly. That is nearer to piety. So the just ruler will have the power to act and to respond, and now they have to make sure that their response is just. It is not revenge and abuse. So there's that inclination that a just ruler who's in a position of power will have to struggle with and face. And it's not easy because human beings are not um, you know, they can be a trial for you, for a just ruler. They can be a trial. Like if we read stories of even during the Prophet's time, Ali may Allah be pleased with him, faced major trials from people underneath him. Uthman, may face major trials from people underneath him. While they were just, we know that these were the rightly just rulers. The people underneath them sometimes were undermining, they were wanting things that was not their rights, and they were acting in ways that showed treachery and animosity. And so you have to deal with this, like Imam Shaw said, love who you want, hate who you want, don't oppress others. Now, the position of a ruler, that's a very strong inclination to, again, like you might have a just reason for not liking somebody because they are treacherous and they do show like say traits of animosity, but you have to fight that inclination not to act unjustly and not to let hatred be the motivation or push you to be acting unjustly. Unfortunately, even if we admit, we quickly forget in practice. So it is, again, Ramadan invites us to go against that inclination. If we listen to people, like I said, we often will speak about people that we love and we praise them, and if something happens to them, they say, we say God is elevating them, and if something good happens to them, we say God is rewarding them for for good they do. That's for people like we love. And if we dislike people, it's the reverse. We'll say, God is punishing them, and they're envious, or we find kind of all the ways to attribute the negative to every action and every behavior. And if we reflect on that, the just ruler has to face and put into practice, kind of like with the saying of Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessing, said, the doers of justice will be on the thrones of light at Allah's right hand. And both of Allah's hands are right hands. Those who were just in their ruling, and they were just, again, with their families and all that over which they were given authority. They were given authority and power, and they acted with justice, not, if you will, abuse. One example that I am trying to recall is Prophet Muhammad assigning Abdullah ibn Mas'ud open spaces in Medina between the dwellings and the palm gardens of the Ansar. And when Banu Abd ibn Zuhra said, remove from us the sons of Abd ibn Mas'ud, replying, why then did Allah send me? Allah does not bless a people among whom a weak man is not given his right. So the concept of justice is most important for the ruler, since he or she will be in charge of the people and the primary disposer of justice in the land. And so the ruler is giving special mention of the seven who will be honored under Allah's shade. So as we've seen, like right now in today's society, there are a lot of people who are given authority. And it's a test. It's a test for them. It's a test for us. Now, how many of those who are given authority and given power will be under Allah's shade? How many will act such that a weak man can come and seek his right and they will be given his right? How many who are unprotected can go to today's rulers and seek protection and get protection? So it's something to reflect on, that when you see someone who's in a position of power, it doesn't necessarily mean that this is a reward, this is a test. The reward is based on, are they using this gift that they have, this position, this authority, and are they acting in ways that are just? If they are, they will be under the shade of Allah. If they are not, then they will be held accountable based on their deeds. Now, I forgot to mention, I believe, when I began this podcast, we're talking about the shade of Allah. There's another hadith by Prophet Muhammad. So it helps to put that in perspective so that as we're looking at the 7 categories. On the day of resurrection, the sun would draw so close to the people that there would be left a distance of only 1 mile. Talking about the sun. So the people will be submerged in perspiration, kind of like sweat, according to their deeds. Some up to their ankles, some up to their knees, some up to their waist. Some would have it all the way up. And I think the Prophet put his hands toward his mouth, like the sweat will reach all the way to their mouth. And another hadith, some will be submerged in sweat, like all the way 70 arm lengths in the earth. Drowning, you might say. So who would want more than on this day than to be under the shade and protection of Allah? So think about that on what our deeds will be if given like what position we're put in. And when we see people in these positions, to recognize that everybody is being tested with the position that they're put in. So in this case, if they act with justice, given the position of power and authority, they can be under the shade of Allah in that category. There is the youth who grew up in the worship of Allah. This is kind of like the Imam Shafi. So let's not pretend that, just because we, worshipped Allah at a young age, did an act or two, put on hijab or anything, that made us like Imam Shafi. Here we're talking about, somebody who was just totally devoted and focused on God in their youth, and it shows, they've memorized the Quran, they became jurists, the number of books that they have written, and they're totally focused. They don't even are aware of what you're doing. Their whole time and their whole worship, their whole focus is on God. Now, we have to appreciate them and respect them, but we need to humble ourselves and recognize that may not be our position. We should be humble and not claim to be Ibn Ata'Allah if we're not Ibn Ata'Allah. That's why I like listening to Ramadan Buti, even though he's a big scholar. He keeps saying, I'm not Ibn Ata'Allah, So it's important that we're humble when we're speaking about the youth who grew up in the worship of Allah. And from the success of a youth is that Allah guides him to a scholar of the Sunnah. So these great scholars were guided under, and they were reared under big scholars of Islam, and they grew up under devotion and worship and guidance towards God. So this is something that if you are in that particular position, again, to continue and to do it for the sake of God. So that person will have used his time, as it goes with the Prophet's advice, take benefit of 5 before 5. He will have used the youth, the health before their sickness, whatever wealth before their poverty, and whatever time they had, all preoccupied, whatever life they had, all for the sake of God. And you saw these great scholars and what came out of them. So their whole life was totally devoted, their time, their life, their health, their wealth was just, totally devoted in worship completely of God. So if you're one of those people, to continue down, if you want to be one of those people and to continue down that path and do it for the sake of Allah, so that you could be invited under the shade of Allah as the youth who grew up in the worship of Allah. A man whose heart is attached to the mosques. There are some of us like we love the mosques. I have, for example, a sister who loves the mosque a lot. She likes to always go to the mosques, and she has developed a strong attachment to the mosques. And this is an invitation for a man or a woman who's attached to the mosque. I know also another, I think she passed away, but there was another woman who lived in Minneapolis, and she would not move because she wanted to be in walking distance of the mosque, and she was attached to the mosque. So I pray that, because of her intention of wanting to be close to the mosque and visit the mosque nonstop and make sure she's right next to it, that she is resurrected as the person who's attached to the mosques. So if we can't be Umar al-Khattab, like I said, or Imam Shafi'i, there is the person who's attached to the mosque. So Ramadan, again, invites us to the mosques and for the Muslim community, and to welcome refuge for Muslims. Sometimes it does become an arena for politics and power struggles. And we ask Allah that He helps the people in the mosque not to say no to that inclination. Like I said, everybody has to fight that inclination that will make that desire impure. So you may have a desire for purity of being attached to the mosque, but then you're going to be called to turn the mosque into like an arena for politics or power struggles. And hopefully you can remember the seven under the shade of the Quran, and try to say no to that inclination and yes to God, and be of those who are resurrected under the category of people whose hearts were attached to the mosques. There are people who love each other for the sake of Allah. They meet for that and they part upon that. We all claim to love whoever it is we love for the sake of Allah. But having mutual love for the sake of Allah is actually a great endeavor, because it benefits both individuals. But what does it mean? It means that the Muslim does not love another except for like their faith, the correctness of their faith. It's not for any like worldly matter. So it doesn't matter like what the person looks like or what they wear, if you will, what race, what class, where they come from, what origin. Perhaps like you don't really like anything about that person, but you can bear witness that that person's correct on their faith. I don't know if you've ever met somebody that, like, on the outside, they're not someone you would ever like inclined to. But if someone told you, well, what about their faith? You would say, no, they really have strong faith. And then you just take a closer look, not, like lustfully, but you're taking a closer look and saying, yeah, that person, I recognize they pray and they do this, and they're always like, they don't enter rumors. They're not into, they're very strong in their faith. And so when you have that type of love for such a person, then it's for Allah's sake. You're not gaining like maybe anything socially, but it's kind of like an anchor. They anchor you, you anchor them. They remind you to be patient, they remind you to be true, you remind them to be patient, you remind them to be true. So Allah the Almighty says, those who have mutual love for the sake of my glory will have pillars of light. They will be envied by the prophets and martyrs. So, subhanAllah, who will envy them? The prophets and the martyrs, or witnesses, you might say, for God. So imagine like being under that category. So again, it looks like a small act of worship, but it teaches us, to consider individuals whose faith is correct. They may not be, like I said, the most like powerful, the most knowledgeable maybe, and so you're not getting like any social benefit. But if you look at the correctness of their deen, they're very like solid, they're really, I don't know if you've ever like met people like that. I've met people like that. Like even though they're poor and they're people like don't notice them, like you can just drink coffee with them and eat a date and you feel like your soul just starts to feel at peace. And the conversation is always like for the sake of Allah. It never like gets into rumors or gossip or backbiting or power struggle. It's all devoted for the sake of Allah. And if you like are saying something that's out of your not according to your teachings, they will let you know, you shouldn't say that, or here's, they'll let you know directly. And if you tell them, this bothered me, they will listen to you. And they will like either if they're wrong, they will take it back. So you'll feel that mutual love for the sake of Allah. So something simple, which most of us are be invited to, but to look at our relationships. And I talked about that in one of the themes, like why do men and women play games? And I talked about the chapter Al-Asr, those who enjoin themselves to patience and those who enjoin each other to patience, enjoin each other to truth. And it's based on the according to Islamic teaching. So you want to think about that. This is an invitation for all of us in this Ramadan to look for. And then the last one, this category is kind of important category to reflect on. And it's actually why the theme of why can men and women play games. This is the category if someone is going to call you, and it's either a man or a woman of beauty and position, but you respond with, I fear Allah. You respond first to yourself and then to the other person. So the world is full of temptations. It's meant to be an abode of trial and tribulations. But if you are going to be called, then you have to prepare yourself. Like, you can't just assume that you're not going to be called. You have to prepare yourself how to respond. So if somebody calls you, we're not saying valid call. We're talking about they're calling you that's against your Islamic teachings. Then you have to say you fear God to yourself, and you tell the person you fear God as well. And so this is another category. So God is testing you here with beauty, you might say. And when somebody's in power in position, whether they're men or women, they are going to call. They see you beautiful, like we saw, for example, Trump and Melania Trump. When someone has power, they are going to look for what? Or position. They want somebody always beautiful as their partner. And so sometimes people will reach out via marriage, but other times people will reach out through un-Islamic means. And if someone calls you in a way that's un-Islamic, then you should say, I fear Allah. And the other person, you should tell them that you fear Allah. So this is very important for us to reflect on, that there are 7 categories, and there's room for all of us in all of these 7 categories to aspire to be under the shade of Allah. There are many inclinations that will call us away from these categories, and some of us, we're not going to be probably tested with that, like I said, just ruler, because we're not in that position. But we will be tested in the area that we are in position. And so we should reflect on that, because we may be like, for example, a mosque. We're not a ruler over a people, but we control the mosque. Is that mosque run according to, for the sake of Allah, or is it a power struggle and an arena for politics? This is something we have to look into. And now we have to look at all the inclinations that might call us away from fulfilling this deed that we are doing for the sake of Allah. Charity. We may be giving charity, but are we giving charity for the sake of Allah? I don't think I mentioned the one on charity. My apologies. Yep. It's you give charity such that the left hand does not know what the right hand gave in charity. So some of us give charity. And again, this isn't meant at anyone, but is it for the sake of Allah? Is most of your charity done secretly? Like I remember somebody like was they had a misunderstanding, and this person jumped in. He says, and he gives lots of secret charity. And so you're like, well, if he's giving secret charity, then how do you know? It was kind of funny. It was, but here it says, it describes it in detail, such that the left hand, the person who's giving charity, their left hand does not know what the right hand is giving. So it's kind of like a totally private charity for God. The other one that I had forgot also to mention, I think I only went over like 5. There's also the one who remembers God such that their eyes shed tears. They remember God in private such that their eyes shed tears. So again, another category that invites you. If you're sick, if you're alone, if for whatever reason you're traveling and you're on your own, if you're in prison and you think, well, I can't reach all of these categories, I can't be a just ruler, there's no opportunity for me to be somebody who's, a worshiper like Imam Shafi. I'm being housed, with other inmates. There are rules that I have to follow. I can't be praying nonstop because certain times the lights have to be out and you have to go to sleep. But there's a category for you. I used to tell people, when they're sick, to remind them of Ayub, the prophet Job, Ayub, about Masani ad-durru wa anta arhamar rahimin. So a person who remembers Allah in private, even there, God has opened the doors for everyone, regardless of situation, to be under the shade. This is again, مَا غَرَّكَ مِنْ رَبُّكَ الْكَرِيمِ. So the generosity is wide open, inviting everyone to receive. And whatever inclination or whatever situation or whatever position you're given, everyone has an opportunity to say no to whatever inclination will call him from God, and to say yes to God. And God has made those 7 categories wide open for everyone to receive the many blessings and many gifts that Ramadan will bless you with. And the most important one is that we will find ourselves under the shade of Allah and the protection of Allah on the day of resurrection. So I pray that this was beneficial for you. And I hope that we think about, as we're moving into Ramadan, what those inclinations are. And we recognize to say no to those inclinations, because that's the, again, La ilaha illallah. It's to recognize that, to say no to those inclinations and to say yes to God. And to remember, the Quran, chapter 17, verse 40, that God created us in a station of honor. So as you are approaching Ramadan, try to remember that verse in the Quran. Don't come into it, like you're bad or you're sinners, but come into it as we have honored the children of Adam. You have provided them with transport on land and sea, given them for sustenance things good and pure, and conferred on them special favors above a great part of our creation. So come to Ramadan, coming to receive, coming as the honored children of Adam that God wants to give you, and encourage yourself to say no to whatever inclination that's going to call you away from God, and to say yes to God. And may you be of those who finds himself under one of those categories, under the shade of Allah and the protection of Allah on the day of resurrection. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah barakatuh, and Ramadan Mubarak. Assalamu alaikum.